Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path.
Hello and welcome to Write to Publish podcast with me, Karen Stanley. So today we're going to talk about dialogue. This can be a real bugbear for writers, and if you get it wrong, it can ruin your story, and if you get it right, it can actually make your story. But it's quite hard to get the knack of it, and it really does take practice to write great dialogue. So we're going to talk through bit by bit the kind of techniques that I can give you some advice and tips on, and how you can really add a bit of sparkle to your dialogue in your stories. Now, it's something that can make or break a scene. It can really lift your characters off your page and bring them to life, and it will hook your readers in like nothing else, like I said before, if you get it right. So it's really worth practicing those skills and making sure that you're really on top of it. So, anyone can write dialogue, but if it's a bit flat or a bit samey, or if it doesn't really sound authentic, then it really will leave your readers feeling a little bit cold. So you want dialogue that feels alive, that sort of breathes by its own, really, that tells us something we didn't know about your characters or your world or your setting, or like backstories, etc. And most importantly, doesn't make your reader cringe. When you read dialogue, or even when you hear dialogue in a film and it gives you the ick a little bit, it makes you feel a bit like, oh, it doesn't ring true, it just feels a bit weird, and a little bit at odds with the character or the story, or it just jars a little bit. So you've really got to think carefully about that. So little sort of truth here, little truth bomb coming up. Great dialogue is really a bit of an illusion. It's not really a transcript of real life conversation. It's sort of the essence of real speech, if that makes sense. And it's refined and focused for the purposes of a story. Because, when you're sitting down with your friend and chatting over coffee, if you wrote down every kind of bit of that dialogue as part of your story, your reader's going to get pretty bored, actually. You're having a conversation and suddenly the dog comes in and you go, oh, blimey, do you want a drink of water? And then something else happens and you say, if you wrote down dialogue as it happens in real life, it probably wouldn't work very well. Some of it would, some of it would really absolutely wouldn't. So let's think, first of all, what is dialogue for? And what's its purpose in fiction? So at its best, dialogue does three things. Firstly, it reveals character, so it gives us an insight into the character. It advances the plot. So sometimes, rather than explaining what's happened blow by blow by blow, your characters can have a quick conversation and it moves the plot forward without too much kind of drama or over gilding of the lily. And it can deepen the tension or the subtext. So let's break that down. So we talk about revealing the character. So the way a person speaks, and I had this exact conversation with one of my mentoring clients this morning, tells us who they are. So if you think about how your best friend talks versus your boss, your grandma, your husband, your child, all of that, the speech patterns, the vocabulary, the pacing, these all say something, and they all kind of reflect something about that character. And again, I was talking with my client this morning and saying, for example, someone who has a fear of heights, for example, you might not know that straight away, but that may lead them to react weirdly, perhaps, in certain situations. And the dialogue might reflect that. It might give us an insight into, oh, that character's not quite right here, or they're not quite feeling right. And we don't really know why, but then it starts to drop clues to the reader. So it's really powerful for that. So perhaps your character's got some little dialogue sort of traits, for example. Maybe they never finish a sentence. And they always cut off halfway. Very annoying when people do that. Maybe now someone else will over-explain everything, like they're reading a manual and their speech is quite laborious and you sort of almost feel yourself zoning out as they're speaking. That's character work right there. That's giving you an insight into the character and telling you more about them in a show rather than tell way. So it's dropping clues about that character's personality, quirks, foibles, etc. It really does advance the plot as well, dialogue. It's not just a filler. It should be doing work. So every scene should have a purpose in your story. If you've got scenes where nothing's happening, sometimes that's powerful, if you want some sort of dynamics and some ebbs and flows. But really, every scene should be doing something. Whether it's purely for descriptive purposes, it should have a purpose in the story. Otherwise, you've got to ask yourself why it's there. And every conversation should nudge us forward, if only a little bit. So revealing a new piece of information or escalating a conflict, making a decision, revealing a lie, all those little bits of language should be revealing something new. We're not just talking kitchen table discussions that are, in their essence, a little bit dull in places. Dialogue can also deepen the tension or the subtext. So some of the best dialogue isn't about what's said, it's about what's not said. So the tension under the words, the things left hanging between characters, things that aren't fully explained. Those unspoken bits are quite often where the magic lives. So, how do you write dialogue that does all that? So let's talk technique, shall we? Firstly, you need to know your characters' voices. You really need to have a good handle on your character profiles and you need to know them. Again, I said to my client this morning, you need to know them like an old friend. You need to know every nuance, quirk, foible of their personality because that will reveal more to us within the dialogue. So each character should have a distinct voice. And that doesn't mean like weird sort of cheesy gimmicks or catchphrases. It means what kind of vocabulary do they use? Someone who, is a real academic might use sort of flowery vocabulary. Are they quite blunt or do they sort of circle around a point? Do they swear? If it's me as a character, then yes is the answer. Do they use slang? Are they a formal speaker? Are they an informal speaker? Do they speak in short bursts or long rambles? I like to hope I'm not long rambles, but I feel like I probably am. So here's a trick. Try muting the dialogue tags in a scene that you've written and see if you can tell who's speaking, not just from the dialogue. So the dialogue tag is that, Simon said, Sarah said, Joe said, Kevin whispered, yeah? That bit is the dialogue tag. If you take them out, which I would say when you're writing dialogue, you don't want them in all the time because it really clutters up the writing. You should be able to tell who's speaking from the dialogue. It should go back and forth and you get a real inclination of, oh yeah, that's so-and-so speaking. You shouldn't have to overthink it too much and you shouldn't get too lost because their voice should be unique to them and you should have got to know that character from your reading so far. If it's really not clear who's saying what, then go back and refine their voices. Make sure that they are a little bit different. Quite apart from the fact that I'm a woman and my husband is a man, we have a very different way of speaking. He's a man of few words. I'm a woman of plenty. I will use more description and I'm quite loud and vocal and animated, where he is very sort of more of an observer and he might answer in 1 or 2 word answers and he might look like he's not listening at all, which is highly likely. But you see what I mean? If we were to split up that dialogue, he might use 3 words where I will use 53. So you would start to know instantly who's talking if that were written on a page. So as I mentioned, I alluded to this earlier, cut the fat. Real conversation is messy. You sit, like I said before, sitting at your kitchen table, the dog walks in, you talk about that. You say, oh, do you want a biscuit, by the way? And, you go back and forth and it's such a sort of thing of the moment. You don't mind too much. But fictional dialogue isn't that messy. You're not writing a transcript, you're writing essence. So we just really want the money shots. We want the key bits of that dialogue. So avoid greetings, small talks and fillers unless they serve an absolute purpose, unless you really need them there. You probably don't need things like how high hi, sorry, I can't even say that. Hi, how are you? Unless that moment of politeness is being used ironically or to create discomfort or something like that. I hope that makes sense. Those sorts of things really, really, I did an edit for a lady once, lovely writer, and really listening well to the feedback. She's doing really well. But there were certain times where it was like, oh, hi, do you want to see? Yeah, okay, I'll sit down here if you like. Oh, well, why don't you sit over there? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you kind of get my drift. A lot of that, we worked on the fact that you don't need all of that information. A lot of that is superfluous to requirements, and it really clutters up the manuscript. And the person reading will just get a bit lost with all of that and could kind of become disengaged. So, stripping your dialogue down to its most compelling, most concise form. So say, for example, hey, I was just thinking maybe we should, I don't know, go to the caravan this weekend. You could try, let's go to the caravan this weekend. You don't really need the, hey, I was just thinking maybe we should, I don't know. You don't need all of that. It's really cluttery. Unless your character's voice is someone who rambles and uses far too many words when they shouldn't. That would create a nice, dynamic or kind of difference between that and someone who's quite short, snappy talker. All of these kind of rules in inverted commas or tips and advice, they're good advice. They're good things to improve your writing. They're good techniques to use, but there will also be occasions where they don't apply. So, practice makes perfect, and you will start to realize, okay, I can break the rules a little bit there because actually that part of my text really demands it or it works. So, take all of this advice, listen to it, digest it, use it, trial it out, but don't be afraid sometimes to buck the trends if you feel that it benefits your manuscript. We're all trying, learning and growing every day, no matter how many books you've written. So, let characters dodge questions. Real people rarely answer questions directly. If you are my husband, for example, drives me crazy. I ask him a question and he will always answer by repeating the question back to me. Or I have to ask him the question about 3 times, or I say something about 4 times. And I say to him, are you listening? Yeah, I'm listening. Okay, so why didn't you answer me? I wonder if that's a conversation that every married couple has. So, this kind of, where were you out last night? Out where? You always do this. That's kind of, that could be our house, so people don't answer. I might say to my husband, do you want to go out for dinner? And he might say, well, I've got some chicken in the fridge. And well, that wasn't my question. Do you want to go out for dinner? Well, do you want to go out for dinner? Do you see what I mean? So it'll go back and forth. So try and reflect that in your dialogue. And what we're doing there, like with, where were you out? Where were you last night? And the person says out. And the other person says, out where? And the other person says, you always do this. And you see what happens is, you're building tension there. You're avoiding the exposition, you're creating rhythm, you're kind of dropping clues, and you're starting to build that rising tension. And when characters dodge, lie, hesitate, avoid, it's much more human and therefore much more interesting. Use interruptions and overlap. Dialogue isn't a turn-based game. I am a shocker for this. I find it really difficult not to interrupt, and I have to sometimes mentally have a little TED talk with myself, partly because I'm pretty sure I've got ADHD and I'm a talker, partly because I get really excited when I'm in conversation with people and an idea springs to my head. I have very little filter and it just comes out of my mouth. So I have to really think about not interrupting people. So, people interrupt all the time. They trail off, they talk over each other, and you can show this with dashes, ellipsis, which is the little 3 dots, what's coming next, or just sort of fast, short exchanges. So I told you, no, you didn't tell me anything. Can you just listen for a second? Again, that absolutely could be a conversation between me and my husband. And this adds the energy and the realism. And finally, I cannot stress this enough. Read it out loud. If you stumble, then your reader will too. If it sounds stiff or like a robot's written it, fix it. Your ear is going to be one of the best tools that you've got. Your your ears don't really lie. So speak it out loud. And if it's an exchange between two people, get someone to read the other person back to you and see how it flows. You know, I'm sure you can find someone willing to help you. And also it will help you to find your scene's rhythm, because good dialogue does have rhythm, and if it doesn't, then you need to think about that. So let's talk about what not to do. Let's avoid some pitfalls next, shall we? Info dumping, they call it in dialogue, and this is a biggie. If your character is saying something that's only for the benefit of the reader, it's going to feel forced. I hate this when they do this in films and they go, "Hi, John. Yeah, I've just come back from my best friend's sister's wedding, but you know she split up with her husband, don't you? And they only went out under duress." It's like they're trying to give you the whole backstory in one little conversation. It doesn't work. It feels forced. It feels contrite. It feels like you're trying to ram all that information home, and it really doesn't work. You know. So, for example, say, I don't know, if you're writing a sci-fi story, as you know, John, the reactor core was damaged in the 1987 incident. It just, people don't say that, do they? You know, John knows it was damaged, and you know the other person knows that it was damaged. You wouldn't preempt your conversation with that. And they sometimes call this, as you know, Bob, dialogue. It's a real red flag. You know, no one talks like that. If John knows, why do you feel the need to tell him? And they do it in films quite a lot, and it's quite lazy writing, really. So the solution is to find natural ways to bring in exposition. So let the character sort of argue about what happened. Let one character be a bit ignorant and another character reluctant to explain. So you're keeping it active. So, for example, wait, that reactor's still online? Yeah, barely. I thought they shut it down after what happened. Well, they said they did. So you already know, we're intrigued, we're learning, but we're learning through character and through tension. We're now wondering, okay, what did happen? Why did they feel the need to shut it down? When did they shut it down? And I've said this in previous episodes, you know, your brain likes to make links. Your brain doesn't enjoy being told all of the information because it will switch off and get a little bit bored. Okay. So now, if everyone sounds the same, this is a red flag. This is something you need to fix. We did sort of touch on this earlier, but it's worth repeating. If every character uses the same speech patterns or the same tone or slang, they blend together. This is a missed opportunity. So can you tell who's speaking literally without the dialogues, just by reading it back? You know, has that character got a unique voice? So you could make a sort of quick character voice sheet, actually. You know, jot down 1 or 2 vocal traits for each of your major characters, and then use this as a compass when writing scenes. So, for example, this character speaks loud and fast. This character pauses, never finishes the end of her sentences, has quite a low, slow voice. So you could write it, you know, with a bit of ers and ums and, you know, that real kind of drone. So, you know, and then you can use those in your writing scenes. This is something I sort of, again, touched on earlier, overuse of dialogue tags. You know, so the said Bob, said Jane, that's your dialogue tag. Sorry, don't do dialogue toad. I don't know what one of them is. Dialogue tag. There used to be this train of thought, don't use said when you can use murmured, whispered, laughed, guffawed, chuckled, muttered. But really what happens there is they get tiresome really, really quickly. So actually, said is your friend. You know, and this is the whole thing, isn't it? We go in little trendy, you know, this is suddenly a big trend, and then now that's not a big trend anymore. We don't use that anymore. We do something else. But actually, when you're writing fiction, if too many dialogue tags, you know, and then there's this tendency to, she chuckled, he laughed, he grinned, he smiled. It's like, no one's that happy all the time for a start. And you don't chuckle after everything you say, because it'll make you sound slightly manic and like you've taken some sort of hallucinogenic substance. So, you know, the dialogue tags are to be used sparingly, and you don't need, you know, she murmured melodramatically. Stephen King is really not a fan of adverbs as well. So, you know, think about that. So, you know, I hate this, she hissed I said I was sorry, he groaned. We're doomed, she whispered fearfully. I mean, you can just hear how cheesy and naff that becomes. So, most of the time, said and asked, they sort of become invisible to the reader, and they can just sort of fade into the background. You don't want them to be the focus of her of your dialogue. So you're going to use action beats or silence to convey tone instead. So, for example, I hate this. She crossed her arms. I said I was sorry. He looked at her. We're doomed. Yeah, so I've only really used I've used the action beats rather than the dialogue tag. So she crossed her arms. Again, that's very show, don't tell. You're telling us, how she's feeling. She's feeling quite defensive and not happy about it by crossing her arms. Okay. And he's saying, I said I was sorry. So rather than he's saying, I'm sorry, he said, well, I said I was sorry. Do you see what I mean? So it becomes much less cluttered. It's cleaner. It's stronger. Trust your readers to get it. They will get it. Yeah. You don't need to over explain everything. Your reader will start to be a bit annoyed by you. And a few little sort of bonus techniques that can bring your dialogue to life. Great dialogue isn't always what's said. It's kind of what's in between the lines. This is your subtext. So there's two people speaking here. You're late. Traffic. Sure. Yeah. So this exchange isn't really about the traffic. It's about the lack of trust between them, because she's going, sure, it was traffic. Yeah. So she's obviously got sarcasm there. So what we're showing the reader there is she doesn't trust him. So then the reader's thinking, oh, why doesn't she trust him? What's he done? Why is she being sarcastic? Yeah. And that's your subtext there. And the subtext will live in pauses, in the tension between words. Let your characters speak their feelings, not always, speak around their feelings rather, not always through them. Humour and personality, I love a bit of humour. Even in serious stories, humour can be sort of a bit of gold, really. A well-placed sarcastic remark, a weird metaphor, quirk of speech. That's what makes characters memorable. So, this place smells like feet and I don't know, what's it, for example. And the other character says, and that's before the party. Yeah, and that's before the party. There's a little bit of humour going on there. You get a sense of tone. You get a sense of the relationship, the world really quickly. Yeah. Don't be afraid of silence. So sometimes what's not said will hit hardest. So, did you love her? He stared out of the window. Oh, forget it, she said. So he didn't speak there. He just stared out of the window. She's taken that to mean, well, she could take that to mean a million things, couldn't you? She could be saying, well, he doesn't want to tell me because he's avoiding it because he does still love her. Or he's maybe looking out the window because he's thinking, dear God, would rather be anywhere than having this conversation. We're starting to get that subtext. So, you feel that rather than being explicitly told everything. Practice makes perfect. The more you practice this, the better you'll get at it. So a little bit of homework for you, some tasks for you. I love doing this, eavesdropping. Do it discreetly because you might get yourself into trouble. But eavesdrop to conversations in real life. Don't record them because obviously that's illegal and could get you into serious trouble. But just listen. How do people interrupt? What do they say? What funny bits of language do they use? What's their tone like? Really listen to all those nuances of language and then strip it down. Take a scene that you've written and now, use that eavesdropping to sort of rewrite that scene and also rewrite the dialogue. Take out like 30% of the words, for example. What happens there? Have you got too much in is basically what I'm trying to say. Take as much out as you can and see if the dialogue's more powerful. Not always, but quite often you'll go, do you know what? I didn't need all that fluff. Try and write a scene with only dialogue and no dialogue tags. Can you make the scene clear and compelling just by what's said? Do we know the character well enough to get the little kind of clues about who's speaking there? Again, you will need dialogue tags sometimes, no matter how strong your character is, because it can get a bit confusing. But take them out and see whether your characters are really strong enough in their own right, if their personality is strong enough to come through to the reader. So writing dialogue, really, it's a craft, and like all crafts, just gets better with practice. You're not going to get good at this doing it once. It really is a practice exercise. Personally, I don't really enjoy writing dialogue all that much. I can find it a little bit like ping pong, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. So I have to really work hard to get motivated by what my characters have got to say. So it's not something that will always come easy. But if you get it right, then the better it will become and the more powerful it will become. The more you read, the more you write, the more you listen, you'll just do it more intuitively, because it will become like second nature, really, hopefully. So don't be afraid to play about with it, experiment, try weird conversations, let your characters surprise you, and just remember, it isn't just words, it's character, it's conflict, it's momentum, it's pace, it's all of that, backstory, it's all of that all rolled into one. So that's it for the Write to Publish. Quite a long episode today. I had lots to share with you today. I hope you found some inspiration and a few practical tips to help you go back and refine and improve your story and your reader engagement, your reader experience. If you enjoyed this episode, please do leave me a review and share it out with others who you think might enjoy it or might get some value from it. Again, if you've got a question, you can find me at Mabel and Stanley Publishing on all the social media platforms. I love hearing from you. I love answering your questions. I love writing conversations with fellow writers. So no question is a daft question, and I'm happy to answer them all if I can. So please do get in touch. And if you want to chat further, you can find me, Karen, at mabelandstanleypublishing.com. Drop me an email. And as I say, I'm always really happy to hear from you and to answer your questions. So until next time, keep writing, keep practicing, and let's get you on the right path. Take care and see you all again soon.